Man tried to buy a mansion, but real estate agent humiliated him, but what he did next was… The car door opened slowly. A well-dressed man stepped out, adjusting his crisp white shirt and navy blazer. He looked up at the tall trees lining the quiet street. The air smelled clean. The sun felt warm on his face. For a moment, he just stood there, taking it all in. Today was a big day. He wasn't just here to look at a house. He was here to buy his dream home. He'd spent years climbing the ladder, saving, sacrificing, saying no to things most people said yes to. All of it led to this: a mansion in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. It was the kind of place he used to ride past as a kid, wondering what it might feel like to live there one day. Now he was about to find out. He walked toward the front door, calm and confident. But the moment it opened, something shifted. The man who greeted him was an older gentleman in a sharp suit. He looked the visitor up and down quickly, his smile thin, forced. "You're here for the showing?" the agent asked, voice polite but cold. "Yes, I'm Derek Johnson," he replied, offering a firm handshake. The agent took his hand, gave it the lightest shake possible, then stepped aside. "Well then, let's begin, shall we?" Derek stepped inside the house, taking in the high ceilings, the soft lighting, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It was beautiful. Everything he imagined. But he couldn't shake the feeling in the room. The tone. The way the agent spoke. It wasn't welcoming. It wasn't warm. It was off. They moved from room to room. In the kitchen, the agent made a small smirk. "These appliances are top of the line, probably more than most people would ever need." Derek smiled politely. "Do you know the brand? I actually enjoy cooking." The agent waved his hand. "Oh, some expensive European brand. You likely haven't heard of it." Derek didn't respond. He just nodded and walked toward the stove, admiring the detail, taking mental notes. He wouldn't let it get to him. In the master bedroom, the agent opened the walk-in closet and let out a soft chuckle. "Bigger than some city apartments? You think you'd be able to fill even a quarter of this?" Derek clenched his jaw slightly. He said nothing, but inside something was shifting. Room after room, comment after comment, it continued. "This pool needs a lot of upkeep. It's not just about affording the house, you know. This space is usually for high-level professionals. Not sure what kind of work you do. These walls were chosen by a designer. It takes a certain eye to really appreciate it." Derek kept nodding, smiling, but the message behind the agent's words was loud and clear. "You don't belong here." Still, Derek stayed quiet. He let the tour continue. He asked questions. He stayed respectful. But he was listening, watching, taking note of every detail, not just of the house, but of the man showing it. Finally, they returned to the grand foyer. The tour was over. "Well," the agent said, clapping his hands together. "Quite a place, isn't it? Of course, I understand if it's a bit out of reach. I could always show you something more reasonable, perhaps in a different part of the city." There was silence. Then Derek smiled. "Actually," he said, reaching into his blazer, "I'm very interested in this property. In fact, I'd like to make an offer." The agent blinked. "An offer?" "Yes." "I came prepared." He handed the agent an envelope. The man opened it, eyes widening as he read the pre-approval letter inside. Full asking price. Backed by one of the city's top banks. The agent's hands trembled slightly. His entire demeanor changed in seconds. "Mr. Johnson, I didn't realize. Of course, we'd be happy to help you submit an offer." But Derek wasn't smiling now. He looked him in the eyes, calm and clear. "Thanks for the tour. I'll be in touch." With that, he turned and walked toward the door. And just like that, the man who had been underestimated walked back into the sunlight, head held high. What he would do next, no one saw coming, but he did. and he was just getting started. The sun was still shining, but something felt different as Derek walked back to his car. The mansion behind him looked exactly the same. Grand, impressive, a dream come true. But now there was a bitter taste in his mouth. He had come here excited, full of pride and anticipation. But what he got instead was a reminder. A reminder that no matter how far he had come, some people still saw only the surface. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands on the wheel, engine off. The air inside the car was quiet. Derek wasn't angry, not in the loud, shouting kind of way. No, it was deeper than that. It was that familiar sting, the kind that builds up over years of being underestimated, side-eyed, misjudged. He stared out the windshield at the mansion. He had loved that house the second he saw it online. The photos barely did it justice. Walking through it, he could already imagine where his future family would eat Sunday breakfast, where his friends would gather for movie nights, where memories would be made. But now? He wasn't sure anymore. Could a house still feel like home if you had to fight to prove you deserved to be inside it? Still, he hadn't said much during the tour. He didn't lash out, didn't try to prove himself. He didn't need to. He knew what he had built, what he had earned. And the truth was, he didn't need anyone's approval to know he belonged. But that didn't make the experience any less painful. As he drove away from the property, his phone buzzed. A friend had texted to check how the showing went. Derek stared at the screen. Should he just say, "It went fine," and move on? Or should he talk about what really happened? He thought about all the moments in his life where he had chosen silence, just to keep the peace. Moments where he swallowed discomfort and moved on. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way the agent had looked at him like he was wasting his time. Or maybe it was the quiet confidence inside him that had reached its limit. He texted back, "The house is amazing. The agent? Not so much. I've got another plan." And with that, the wheels in his mind began to turn. The next morning, Derek woke up earlier than usual. The first thing he did after his workout and coffee was sit down at his computer. He looked up the property again. Same photos, same price, same agency listed. But this time, he didn't stop there. He started digging. A few calls, a few online searches, and within an hour, he found what he was looking for. The name of the current owner. It was a man named Richard, a CEO in the tech industry. Derek had never met him, but they shared a few mutual contacts in business. Derek picked up the phone and made a call to a colleague who knew Richard personally. "Do you think he'd be open to selling the house directly?" Derek asked. "I think he might," the colleague said. "He's been trying to sell that place for a while." "What happened with the agent?" Derek gave a short, honest version of the story. No drama, just facts. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I'll get you his number." That evening, Derek called Richard directly. The conversation was respectful, open. When Derek told him about his experience with the showing, Richard sounded surprised and a little embarrassed. "That's not what I want attached to my name," Richard said. "Then maybe we can work something out directly," Derek offered. "Save you on agency fees. Save me the trouble." They talked for another half hour. Richard was impressed by Derek's professionalism, his preparation, and his calm approach. When they hung up, Derek felt something he hadn't felt since the day before. Hope. Not just in getting the house, but in doing it on his own terms. Still, he knew he'd need a trustworthy real estate agent to handle the legal side, and there was no way he was going back to Prestige Properties. He called a few trusted friends for recommendations. One name kept coming up, a sharp, no-nonsense agent with a great track record and a reputation for treating all her clients with the respect they deserved. Derek made the call. "Hi," he said. "I'm buying a house. But there's a bit of a story behind it." And with that, the next chapter of the journey began. The next few days passed quickly, but Derek's focus never wavered. While the world around him buzzed with meetings and deadlines, his mind stayed locked on one goal: buying that house, not through that arrogant agent, but through his own efforts. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from the agent he had hired, someone who came highly recommended by people he trusted. She had already begun handling the paperwork. She was efficient, responsive, and respectful. There was no need to over-explain things with her. She understood what he wanted and why it mattered so much. Derek leaned back in his chair, watching the emails fly back and forth. It felt good to be in control again. No passive-aggressive smiles, no doubting eyes. Just professionals getting things done. Meanwhile, conversations with the mansion's owner, Richard, were going better than he expected. They spoke casually now, sometimes even joking. Richard had opened up about why he was selling, downsizing after his kids had moved out, ready for a change of pace. But more than that, Richard made it clear he respected Derek. "I appreciate the way you handled things," he said one evening. "A lot of people would have just walked away after that kind of experience, but you handled it like a pro." Derek smiled, though his voice stayed calm. "I've had practice." They negotiated a price, slightly below the original listing since Derek was skipping the agency and covering most of the closing costs. Richard was happy with the deal. So was Derek. Still, Derek didn't tell many people what was happening. Not yet. He wanted everything signed and sealed before he shared the news. It wasn't about bragging, it was about closure, about finishing what he started, his way. When the sale was nearly finalized, Derek drove past the mansion again. He didn't get out this time. He just sat across the street in his car, watching the sunlight hit the windows just right. It still felt surreal, like watching someone else's life. But it was real. This place was about to be his. He thought back to the moment he stood in that very foyer. The same foyer where he'd been quietly insulted, looked down on, doubted. And now the keys would be handed to him. Not because he fought for approval, not because he begged to be treated with respect, but because he earned it and demanded it silently, through action. Then came the day the papers were ready to be signed. Derek met with Richard and his new agent at a lawyer's office downtown. It was all business, signatures, documents, handshakes. But when Richard handed Derek the keys, something shifted. "This house is yours now," Richard said, smiling. "Make it count." Derek nodded slowly, fingers closing around the keys. "I plan to." That night, he returned to the house, but this time not as a guest, not as someone who needed to prove himself. He walked up the same steps, opened the same front door, and stepped inside as the owner. The silence of the house greeted him. Every room stood empty, yet full of possibility. He walked through it slowly, the kitchen, the bedrooms, the backyard. The echo of his footsteps reminded him how far he'd come. He didn't smile out of pride. He smiled because it felt right. The next few weeks were a blur of deliveries, planning, and quiet reflection. He filled the mansion with furniture that reflected his taste. Nothing flashy, just simple elegance. Art that inspired him. Shelves filled with books he loved. A kitchen ready for long dinners with friends. And one room, his favorite, was set up as a home office. That same space the agent had said might be too much for someone like him. But it wasn't too much. It was just right. Derek thought about what to do next. He didn't just want to live in the house. He wanted it to mean something. He wanted it to be more than walls and windows. He wanted it to reflect what he stood for: kindness, dignity, strength, and community. So he came up with an idea, a charity event, something meaningful. A fundraiser that would bring people together for a good cause, and just maybe, serve as a quiet, powerful statement. As the plans came together, Derek finalized the guest list. He added friends, business contacts, community, leaders, and one unexpected name, the same agent who had humiliated him, not out of revenge, not out of spite, but because sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to let them witness who you really are, on your own terms, in your own space, surrounded by people who respect you, not for how you look, but for who you are. Derek looked out his window that night, the city lights blinking in the distance. He had the keys. He had the house. And now, he had a plan. The house was quiet, but Derek's mind wasn't. It had been just over a month since the day he walked through the front door as the owner, and every day since, something inside him had shifted a little more. At first, it was just about furnishing the place, getting the right couch for the den, choosing between warm or cool lighting for the hallway. But once the furniture was in and the walls were decorated with art that reflected his soul, the house started to feel like something more than property. It started to feel like a part of him. Derek stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room, sipping coffee one morning, watching the sun rise behind the trees. The grass sparkled with dew. The city was waking up, but in this quiet neighborhood, it felt like he was in his own world. This was peace. But Derek had never been someone to just sit in peace and do nothing with it. He always believed that if you were lucky enough to be successful, you had a duty to open a door for someone else too. That belief had carried him through every chapter of his life. It's what made him want this mansion in the first place, not just as a personal goal, but as a place where something bigger could happen. That's when the idea had hit him. A charity event. Not just any event, but something intentional. Something that would bring people together, raise money for a cause that mattered, and quietly rewrite the story that started with someone doubting him at his own front door. He didn't want to tell that story directly. He wasn't out to shame or embarrass anyone, but he wanted to shift the energy around what happened, to turn that moment of humiliation into something powerful. So he started planning. He made a list of causes close to his heart: mentorship programs, scholarship funds for underprivileged youth, community outreach. After some thinking, he chose one: an education fund that helped young students of color find opportunities in fields like tech and finance, the very industries where he had built his career. Then came the guest list. He started with friends, co-workers, business partners, then added community leaders, local artists, entrepreneurs, and people from the nonprofit world. He wanted this night to reflect everything he stood for: class, culture, compassion. And then, he added one more: name, the real estate agent. Yes, the same man who had shown him the house weeks ago and treated him like an intruder. Derek didn't add his name for revenge. He added it because it felt right. Maybe the man would come. Maybe he wouldn't. But either way, Derek knew this event was about showing the kind of person he chose to be, not the one some people assumed he was. As the date approached, the house transformed again. Event planners brought in lights and music. A chef curated a menu filled with subtle nods to Derek's upbringing, flavors that reminded him of home, but presented with elegance. Bartenders set up stations in the backyard. Waiters rehearsed serving routes through the hallway. The day before the event, Derek walked through each room, checking details. The smell of fresh flowers filled the air. The lights were soft and golden. It was everything he imagined, and more. But beyond the aesthetics, there was meaning in every corner. A photo of his parents on a hallway table. A bookshelf in the study filled with titles that had guided him through life. A framed letter in the foyer. A copy of the exact mortgage approval letter he had handed over that day. Not to be boastful, but as a personal reminder of that moment when everything changed. Then came the evening. Guests began to arrive in sharp suits and elegant dresses. The driveway filled with high-end cars. Laughter echoed through the halls. Derek stood at the front door, greeting each person with a warm handshake and a smile. He was calm, grounded. He wore a suit that fit perfectly, not because it was expensive, but because it felt like him. Then, a black sedan pulled up. Out stepped the real estate agent. Derek saw him before he saw Derek. The man paused at the end of the walkway, eyes scanning the mansion, now lit beautifully in the evening light. His expression was stiff, hesitant. When he finally reached the door, their eyes met. "Good evening," Derek said, extending his hand. There was a pause. Then the agent shook it quietly. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for the invitation." "Of course," Derek replied. "Glad you could make it." No bitterness, no sarcasm, just grace. The agent stepped inside, looking around with careful eyes. He recognized the rooms, of course, but they looked different now. Not just in decor, but in energy. They were alive, filled with people, filled with purpose. As the night went on, Derek gave a short speech in the living room. Nothing flashy, just honest words. "This house," he said, "is not just a place to live. It's a place to build something better. We all come from different paths, but if we support each other, amazing things can happen." The crowd clapped. Some people nodded, others just smiled quietly. In the back of the room, the agent stood still, watching, listening. No one pointed fingers. No one brought up the tour. But somehow, the message found him anyway. Derek didn't look for him again that evening. He had done what he came to do. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He was already home. The guests lingered well into the evening. The rooms of the mansion glowed softly, filled with the sounds of laughter, glasses clinking, quiet conversations. For Derek, it was a surreal feeling, seeing his home come alive in a way he had only imagined. He moved through the crowd like a seasoned host, checking in with each guest, making sure everyone was comfortable. Every now and then, someone pulled him aside to compliment the house, the food, or the way the event made them feel. But more than anything, people talked about the cause, about how important it was, how needed it was. That was what mattered most to him. He caught a glimpse of the agent once, standing near a painting in the hallway, staring at it like he was looking for something beyond the canvas. No one was speaking to him. He seemed small, not in stature, but in presence. The loud authority he carried during the house tour was gone, replaced by something quieter. Uncertainty, maybe even regret. Derek didn't approach him again. He didn't need to. The man had been invited. He had seen the truth for himself. That was enough. Later in the night, Derek stood out on the back patio, away from the noise. The garden lights shimmered across the pool, and the soft hum of jazz drifted from the speakers. He looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and allowed himself to truly take it in. This was what it meant to win, not just buying a house, but reclaiming the space where he had been made to feel small. Not just living in luxury, but using it to create moments that uplifted others. He remembered being younger, sitting in a small apartment, watching interviews of successful people and wondering how they made it all work. How they carried themselves. How they stayed grounded. Now he was one of them. And yet he didn't feel like he had arrived. He felt like he had just started. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Beautiful night." Derek turned. It was the agent. He looked different now. His voice was lower, his shoulders not as square. He stood there not as the gatekeeper of an exclusive property, but as a man, unsure of where he stood. "Yes, it is," Derek replied calmly. "I've been thinking about what you said," the agent continued, eyes not meeting Derek's, "about creating something better. I just wanted to say, I didn't handle things right when you came to see the house." There was a long pause. The music played quietly behind them. Derek didn't rush to speak. "I know," he finally said gently. "And it wasn't the first time someone looked at me and assumed less. But it never gets easier." The agent swallowed, his eyes softening. "I'm sorry for the way I made you feel, truly. I judged you before you even said a word." Derek nodded slowly. "Apologies are a good start. But awareness, that's where real change begins." "I'll remember this," the agent said, more to himself than to Derek. Derek offered a small nod, then glanced back at the view. "It's a nice house, isn't it?" The agent gave a tired smile. "It's more than a house now." Derek didn't reply. He didn't need to. The agent excused himself and disappeared into the house. Derek stayed outside a while longer, feeling the stillness return to the air. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, Derek walked through the empty halls. The laughter still echoed faintly in the air, like the house was holding on to the energy. He reached the staircase, pausing at the framed letter still sitting in the foyer, the same mortgage letter that once shocked a man who didn't think he could afford to be there. He smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Derek had learned long ago that success wasn't just about climbing the ladder. It was about how you carried yourself when others tried to knock you down, how you stayed calm in rooms that weren't built for you, how you made space for others, even when you weren't offered any yourself. That night, as he stood under the soft chandelier glow, Derek decided something quietly in his heart. This house wasn't just going to be a home. It would be a platform for giving, for mentoring, for rewriting stories like his into something new. A place where people could gather, be seen, be heard, be respected. He didn't buy this mansion to prove anything to anyone. But somehow, he had. And now it was time to do even more. In the days following the event, the mansion settled into a soft calm. The streamers were packed away, the rented glassware returned. But something still lingered in the air. Something powerful. Something felt. It wasn't just the scent of the fresh flowers that had been in every room, or the faint memory of music, echoing off the high ceilings. It was the energy, the weight of the moment. That night had been more than just a party. It had been a shift. And the city had noticed. Photos from the event circulated online. Guests posted selfies in the garden, videos of Derek's short speech, and captions full of admiration. "A powerful reminder not to judge a book by its cover," one person wrote. This wasn't just a fundraiser. This was a masterclass in quiet dignity. The story began to spread. Not because Derek had told it, but because people had felt it. They talked about the energy of the house, the atmosphere of mutual respect, the kindness that wrapped around every conversation. No one needed to say what had happened before the mansion was bought. They didn't need to. The contrast between that night and the story behind it was already speaking louder than words. And on the other side of the city, in a much quieter office than it used to be, the real estate agent sat alone at his desk. The fallout had begun quietly, like a slow leak in a tire. A client canceled a meeting. Another decided to list with someone else. Then came a phone call, not from Derek, but from someone who had been at the event. "I heard you were the agent who showed him the house," the voice said plainly. He didn't say anything, but your name came up. That's not the kind of energy we want to be connected to. More calls followed, some polite, others blunt. One longtime client simply emailed, "We're moving our business. No explanation needed." By the end of the week, the agent had lost nearly half of his listings. His colleagues at the agency grew distant. No one said anything directly. But their silence was louder than any accusation. The same people who once admired him were now keeping their distance. His reputation had been built over years. But now, all it took was one night, a night he hadn't even been directly called out on, to shake it all loose. He remembered standing in that foyer, barely shaking Derek's hand, shrugging at the kitchen appliances, making small, sharp comments, thinking they were harmless. But they hadn't been harmless. They had told a story, and now he was the villain in it. Meanwhile, Derek was anything but focused on revenge. He barely thought about the agent anymore. His days were filled with planning, new charity events, mentorship meetups, even casual dinners with young professionals who reminded him of himself. One evening, he opened an envelope that had arrived. In the mail, it was handwritten. The letter was from a young man who had attended the event as someone's guest. I didn't know what to expect that night, but hearing you speak and seeing what you've built, it gave me hope. People like me don't always get to see people like you living like that, with such kindness and strength. I just wanted to say thank you. Derek folded the letter slowly and set it on his desk, beside a growing stack of similar messages. That was the real reward, not the house, not the applause, but the impact. Quiet, steady, real. He didn't post about the event online. He didn't tell the story in interviews. He didn't name the agent. He didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered in how he carried himself, in what he created, and in what he didn't have to say out loud. But the world was paying attention. Even at prestige properties, conversations were shifting. New training programs were being introduced. Managers began holding meetings on unconscious bias and professionalism. They didn't say it was because of Derek, but the timing said everything. That's what power looked like. Not in raising your voice, but in raising the standard. A few weeks later, Derek received another message, this time from the agent himself. I've lost a lot recently, not just business, but perspective. I wanted you to know that I've been doing a lot of thinking, and if there's ever anything I can do to make things right, I'm open to that. I understand if you don't reply. Derek read the message twice. Then he sat quietly for a long time. He didn't reply. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some lessons weren't about redemption. They were about growth. And some growth came not from being forgiven, but from learning to forgive yourself and change anyway. For Derek, there were bigger things ahead. The mansion had already hosted its first fundraiser. Now he was planning another, this time for young entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. He was building something, brick by brick, event by event, moment by moment. He was done being underestimated, and now he was lifting others up with him. Weeks passed. The mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. It was alive now, with movement, voices, plans, and purpose. The kind of place where ideas could grow, where people gathered not just to admire marble floors or chandeliers, but to connect, share, and dream. Derek stood in the study one quiet evening, his sleeves rolled up, hands tucked into his pockets, the soft golden desk lamp casting a warm glow over the room. On the wall hung a framed photo of his parents. Below it, a shelf held a stack of letters, notes from strangers, mentees, community members, people who had seen what he did with his home and found strength in it. He picked up one letter and read it again. It was from a young woman who had attended the last networking event he hosted. She wrote about feeling invisible in boardrooms, about how she almost left her job because no one seemed to take her seriously. But after hearing Derek speak that night, about persistence, self-worth, and doing things on your own terms, she decided to stay. Not just stay, but lead. Derek placed the letter down carefully. This was the why. Buying the mansion had started as a personal milestone, a dream that began as a kid staring through bus windows at beautiful neighborhoods that always felt like they belonged to someone else. But now, the house had become something much bigger than a personal win. It had become a space for others to see what was possible, a space that didn't just open its doors, but welcomed you all the way. And outside, the garden lights were turning on. Guests were beginning to arrive again. this time for a youth mentorship dinner. Nothing fancy, no media, no hashtags. Just real conversation, real connection. Young professionals paired with leaders who once sat exactly where they now stood. Nervous, ambitious, unsure. Derek walked to the front door, welcoming people in with the same calm confidence he always carried. A woman paused in the doorway. "You've really created something here," she said. Derek smiled. "That was always the plan." The evening moved gently. People shared meals, traded stories, passed around business cards, and laughed in ways that only happen when you feel seen and respected. No loud speeches, no staged moments, just impact, unfolding in real time. At one point, Derek slipped away and walked out to the balcony, needing a minute to himself. The cool air brushed across his face as he looked out over the city lights. Below, in his backyard, the warm glow from the patio framed a gathering of young professionals deep in conversation. He thought about the road that had led him here, about every quiet insult he'd swallowed, every time he had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. He thought about the day he stood in this same house, being shown around by a man who didn't think he belonged. And now he owned the house, and the moment, and the story. But what made him proudest wasn't the house itself. It was how he had responded. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't humiliated anyone in return. He didn't try to show them with anger or ego. Had chosen grace. He had let his actions do the speaking, and those actions had built something that would outlast the moment of pain. That's what legacy looks like. He walked back inside to join the guests. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house had gone quiet again, Derek sat in his kitchen with a cup of tea. No music, no noise, just stillness. He stared out the window for a moment, then pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. He began typing slowly. Success is not about being seen. It's about what you do when nobody sees you. It's how you move forward after being judged, and what kind of door you hold open once you've walked through. He read the lines, then saved them. Not everything needed to be posted or published. Some words were just for him. He walked through the hallway, turning off lights one by one. The house, now familiar and lived in, exhaled around him. When he reached his bedroom, he paused, looked over his shoulder. For a long moment, he stood there, quietly, then smiled. He had come a long way, not just in distance, but in self-worth, in clarity, in strength. This wasn't the end of the story, just a pause before the next chapter. He had more plans, more lives to touch, more rooms to fill with laughter, purpose, and hope. But tonight, he could finally rest. Not because the world had changed, but because he had changed it. In his own way, on his own terms, without ever raising his voice. And the house, the mansion that once whispered, "You don't belong here," now stood silent, but proud, because it finally did, just like Derek.